So each of our panelists are involved in blockchain, in the work that they do, and yeah, I'd just love for each of you to just talk a bit about yourself and your background and how you got involved in the blockchain space.
Okay, my name is Rafael. I work in the business sector, in the financial sector. I work with RSM Australia in the assurance and advisory divisions. We have been working in the firm with blockchain, not only in Australia but also in the US. So now we have a few clients that are adopting the technology. And other ones that are seeking how they can find opportunities there because they understand that this is the new step and they need to embrace the technology. Myself particularly, I'm an auditor, so I have a few clients at the moment that are funds that are using and investing in the business of the cryptocurrency, and therefore obviously she's underpinning with the blockchain technology, so that's how I got involved. So
thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Reece Proudfoot. I am an innovation strategist at WWF Australia. I run a program called Labs, which is WWF's accelerator and venture production lab. How I got involved in blockchain? Well, I came up through campaigning. I was a climate change campaigner for 6 years. My primary motivation is anything that's going to enable us to exponentially increase impact, so environmental impact or social impact. And I think to do that, we need to be developing new, innovative, high-impact business models as well. And I see huge potential in blockchain to enable us to do that, as we've heard from some of the earlier panelists and talks as well. Our journey into this space, we launched Labs 2 years ago. We spent the first year sort of scratching our heads and going, what are we going to do about blockchain? It could be massive in the social impact space, in the charity space. We didn't really feel that we knew enough about it to launch into any use cases. So we spent a year just watching, learning and experimenting before diving a little bit deeper into some of the use cases we're in now, but we'll probably come to that a little bit later on. Alright, hi, I'm Jason from the NEM blockchain. I'll start a bit about myself. Used to be a banker and I went into startups, co-founded 2 companies, one in insurance technology and another one a smart city accelerator in the blockchain, AI and robotics, and we're having contracts with the Malaysian government. So originally Malaysian, the startups are there. Quick plug, today is Malaysia's Independence Day as well. I'm very glad to see. Oh, thank you. Good hope for Malaysia as well. With the new government, it's been the first new government in 60 years, and there has been conversation on blockchain as well. Yeah. So I moved from startups then I moved to Melbourne, and I'm now working for a non-profit. And as a non-profit, I'm working with the NEM.io Foundation. I'm a marketing guy, as you can see. We're here to promote the NEM blockchain platform. It's a protocol like the Ethereum platform and the Bitcoin platform. And we've been around for 3 years. We have 600 nodes around the world, and we have committed a US $40 million budget to promote and educate people about the NEM blockchain and blockchain in general. And we are present in 40 countries, so I also oversee Australia and New Zealand. We've got a full-time team of 8 people and 20 different partners and networks, so part of our team are here as well. And we essentially want to present NEM as the easiest to understand and the easiest to use blockchain in the world. So I'll pass it down.
Hey everyone, my name is Nick and I'm the co-founder of Sempo. At Sempo we have this belief that one of the best ways to help people affected by humanitarian crisis is just to give them money rather than giving them in-kind aid. And there's a whole bunch of data that shows that it's just a lot more effective in flexibility and empowering people. And we basically created Sempo to help NGOs get cash more effectively into crisis zones when there's a low level of financial inclusion. I, to be honest, was kind of dragged kicking and screaming into the blockchain space. I have a background in mathematics and have been studying cryptography, not cryptocurrency, cryptography for a while. So kind of knew a lot about it, but was pretty skeptical. And then in our adventures in terms of trying to get cash into developing countries where there was just no infrastructure, we ran into a whole bunch of problems, and more it looked like blockchain was really the only appropriate solution we could find. So one day I bit the bullet and started just writing some Solidity contracts on Ethereum, and just realized how phenomenal it was for solving a bunch of the problems we were trying to solve around multi-party trust and international borders. And I've really started to very rapidly get into the space since then. So still quite a skeptic, but definitely think there's a lot of potential for certain aspects.
Thank you. So at a kind of high level, can you talk about, and anyone can jump in, about the trends that you're seeing in terms of practical applications of blockchain in the impact space at the moment? Do you want to?
Sure. Cool. Well, so we have spent most of our time thinking about how blockchain can help to transform global supply chains. For those of you who don't know WWF, we're one of the world's largest environmental charities, environmental NGOs. We work in three main ways. Traditional conservation, which is what most people know us for, on-the-ground conservation. Science-based policy, we do a lot of lobbying to get good policy. And thirdly, transforming global markets, which people probably don't know about as much. And the way that we do that is that we think that if we're going to transform global markets to make them a lot more sustainable and fair and just, we're not going to get 8-9 billion consumers to change the way that they shop. It's just a few too many people. We're also not going to get 1 billion producers to change the way that they produce, but we can work with the 500 organizations, companies, brands in the middle that control the vast majority of global supply chains. And if we can change the way that they act, then we can actually change both the production behaviors and consumption choices. So we see blockchain as hugely transformative in that space. Coincidentally, I mean, just from being immersed in this space for the last couple of years, the most mature use cases that I've seen in the impact space have also been supply chain use cases. I can sort of see people nodding, so I think we're all in sort of furious agreement. And whether that's banks or whether that's the big brands like Walmart and Nestle, or whether that's us at WWF Australia, we've completed a full supply chain on using tuna from the Pacific, going from what we call bait to plate, so going from the ocean through the entire supply chain all the way to, it was a conference in New York recently, the Ethereal conference, where we managed to get sashimi all the way from the waters of the Pacific to, well, it wasn't sashimi at the time, it was a tuna. Probably wasn't very happy about being sashimi. But yeah, all the way to this conference in New York, where there's some very happy conference participants were eating sashimi and able to scan the napkin using their phone and see the exact journey, the provenance of the tuna, where it was caught, the geolocation, the fishing trawl it was caught on, the way it was caught, etc., etc. So we see great potential in this space, and luckily, it seems to be that supply chain use cases are the most mature at the moment as well in terms of building them out and testing them, and we all know just how important it is in the blockchain space to just be like pumping out those experiments and testing and testing and testing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So I was actually there in New York City, and the sashimi tasted good. It was still fresh, yeah. It's very nice, long queue though. But as I talk about the blockchain applications, I also backtrack a bit about the ecosystem in Australia, the charity ecosystem. So I think someone mentioned it is true, the Australian Charities Report 2016 said there are 52,000 charities registered with the Australia's Charities and Non-for-Profits Commission, out of which, for that year alone, the total revenue was 142.8 billion Australian dollars, out of which 70% of all charities receive it based on donation or bequests, and out of which that employs 10.6% of the Australian workforce, or 1.3 million people with 2.9 million volunteers. So that is a big industry itself, and these charities are not just charities that are in Australia for Australia, but many are for the world as well. And you can see that it's a big space to look into. Now personally, over the last 1 year, I've actually been to 20 cities across the world, and if I actually count the number of social impact projects, there are almost 100 different social impact projects on different platforms saying that they want to do some good for humanity. And there are also a lot of givers. There's this thing, how many of you heard of the Pineapple Fund? The Pineapple Fund was a fund by an anonymous donor, and that donor actually committed 5,104 bitcoins which was worth $55 million US dollars worth, and that anonymous person gave it to 60 different charities. So we've seen from the giving side that there are people like that. And then from the development side as well, we've got a lot of businesses and use cases. So I'll share a couple. In Melbourne here, we've got a company called copyrightsbank.com. They essentially timestamp your digital works on the blockchain, and it becomes a legally defensible copyright material. So you can actually go to court and say this is an evidence that this is my copyright, because you can't register your copyright with IP Australia, only a patent and trademark. And Copyright Bank has offered to digitize Maori works in New Zealand. Because there are a lot of infringed works as well with their paintings and so on, and that's a part of social impact that they're doing. There's a company called Origins in New Zealand where they, as a traditional business, do corporate uniforms made by poor families in India as part of a way to support employment, and they actually put that into about 100 different corporates in New Zealand, and they're going to put that on the blockchain as well. So we're seeing traditional businesses like Origins coming on the blockchain, and we're seeing brand new entrepreneurs like Copyright Bank supporting the community with the intellectual property. Quite a bit coming on.
I think something that's really interesting to consider is your point about the pineapple fund is fascinating. Like that, the person behind whoever it is obviously a fantastic person. He had this quote, and he realised he woke up one day and he realised he had so much money and it just wasn't making him any happier and wasn't what to do with it. And so he's having this enormous positive impact, but if you think about it, none of that impact is actually intrinsic to blockchain. I'm not saying it is, but let's just say hypothetically that Bitcoin is this giant Ponzi scheme where everyone's just made money and it has no use. And he's made money from that, which is great, but if he made his money in any other way, the impact he's actually having by donating that to charities is the same. The blockchain isn't a core part there. In contrast, I think provenance is, and all these legal things are great. I mean, it's so cheap to try and get legal documents up online. This is something that's like really core to blockchain technology. You can't do that any other way. And this is something we actually experienced kind of recently. There's a big organisation that is either Master Visa or something like that, I don't know, who has recently patented a technology that's very similar to something we were using. And we were like, oh no, how are we going to like prove that we have the technology beforehand? And then we realised we literally had a smart contract up there. So there's no debating it. And I think that sort of experience of knowing that smaller organisations, everyone's equal on the blockchain when you have a contract. You can bully someone as much as you like. The smart contract's a smart contract. And I think that's a really interesting place to think about social impact, because that playing field changes the way we approach intentions, and you don't have to worry about large organisations basically acting anti-competitively in a lot of circumstances. So I think that's a really positive aspect and practical implication.
That's all.
I think in connection with Jason's comments, I think from the charity point of view, the facility that now the blockchain technology provides to facilitate the transaction, to facilitate that help and funds can be actually get to the right organizations. I think that's fantastic, and there is a lot of potential there, and also the ability on the security side, so that people know that whatever they are trying to help in whatever cause is, that actually the money is and the funds are getting to the right organization. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. And I think the challenge to some extent is how we can get those big organizations, big charity foundations, to be in the front head with the blockchain technology.
There you go. WWF.
So in terms of projects that are going on at the moment, can you talk about some of the most powerful applications of blockchain in the impact space that you've seen?
Simple. That's so simple. Most powerful blockchain application based out of Melbourne.
Yeah, maybe you just want to tell us more about how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started trying to get money into crises about a year ago. We actually first launched the California wildfires. We had this hypothesis that you could use data to identify people who have been affected by crisis and then get money to them within a number of hours instead of aid, which normally can take weeks. And this was a really simple process for us. We actually just used online data from Facebook to verify their location and just used PayPal to send it to them. And it was hugely impactful. We were sending $100 and at first I thought it was absolutely pointless because we had someone who came and they said that lost their entire house. I was like, shit, I'm giving $100, this is really stupid. And this person came back to me and was like, you don't understand how much this means to me. My wife has been able to buy the same set of clothes that she lost 3 days ago in the fire. And when I read that, I actually just started crying because I was like, holy crap, this is like the impact you can have with technology if you target it correctly. We then did that again in Kenya, and we found we could just give people money using M-Pesa. It was really effective. Easier to get money to people in Kenya than it was to get people to money to the Tafra bushfires, incidentally. It's just the nature of the beast, very strange. And then we tried to launch for the volcanic eruption in the Philippines, and there was just literally no good way of getting money in there. Because there's no mobile money wallets like M-Pesa, and there's no big banks. Everyone has very little financial inclusion. But we were speaking to someone on the ground there, and they told us, I know exactly what I need to go and buy from the local store. So just let me go to that store and buy what I need, and then you can repay the store after the fact. And this made a lot of sense to us because the store, having supply contracts with suppliers, had a lot of higher level of financial inclusion, so it was easy to get money to them. And it meant that instead of trying to find ways to get money to hundreds of individuals, we only had to find a way to get it to a handful of stores. But then, of course, the problem sort of arose is how do you actually work out how much people have spent at stores, who's actually spent their contracts here. You've got this weird he said, she said sort of issue. And so we built this credit tracking system that allows you to transfer digital credits using SMS. So the person could go up to the store and say, I want to transfer 5 credits to this person, and they'd send an SMS to a hotline number, and then the store would get a SMS saying they'd received those credits. And it made a lot of sense to us to actually put that on the blockchain in terms of that credit tracking process to actually have the integrity the whole way through the system. And so that really started what we actually built today, and we're travelling to Lebanon in about 5 hours to actually launch that on the border of Syria to do cash to refugees there. And that's going to be our first large-scale launch of this. But I think it's a good example of something that makes a lot of sense for blockchain, because it is such it's such a chaotic environment, and something that has absolute trust around it does make a lot of sense to me there. And you're working across borders with lots of parties, so it's easy to bring everyone into the one place.
I think that's a very powerful blockchain application. Deserves a round of applause. Someone is here right now at RMIT University, in the next 15 to 20 hours he's in Lebanon, right, doing something for the people in Syria. How often can you get people like this on stage? So that's something that could really be potentially impacting. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, well done. Yeah.
So I think the power or the potential that I see is going back to what has been touched on a few times today, which is how do we unlock the potential for trillions of dollars to be channeled into social impact. So, I think for every one amazing use case that we hear about, if we're going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, we need thousands of these. So how can we be supporting these kind of entrepreneurs to be creating these at scale and to be scaling up what already exists? And as Lena touched on earlier, there's a $2.5 trillion funding gap to achieve the SDGs. But that's not because there's a lack of capital. There is plenty of capital out there. Where the gap exists because there's a lack of high impact, highly innovative, high value projects to match that capital. And so, our prerogative as social impact practitioners or entrepreneurs is to be supporting the kind of high impact projects to make sure they have robust business models, and then putting them in front of the funders who can make them happen, whether that's venture capital or whether it's traditional philanthropy or blended finance. So actually using philanthropy as risk capital and venture capital coming into scale. And so I think the potential that we see is a model which is closer to what Jason was sort of touching on earlier, which is how can you be engaging and activating the crowd to be creating these kind of solutions led by NGOs, but not done by NGOs, because if we do that, we're never going to scale fast enough. NGOs are very good, they are excellent at understanding systems thinking and system dynamics. They're very good at articulating a problem and how you should think about solving that problem. They don't have the resources to do all of the solving. They just don't. I've worked for an NGO for 7 years. Like, we're never going to be able to do it all. Like, but they can articulate problems. And so if you could move to a model where you have incentivized impact, where NGOs or any other impact kind of organisation, it could be a think tank, it could be academics, are articulating how to solve a problem. Impact practitioners can come along and do the solving because they're incentivized to do it. You could exponentially increase the amount of people that are active in this space, and it could be management consulting firms, it could be social enterprises, it could be startups, or it could be NGOs. It doesn't matter who it is, as long as you have a way of actually articulating how to solve the problem, and most importantly, verifying the impact at the end. And I think that's why we need models like Impact Coin to be able to do that. We've been having a good look at this space for the last year or so. We're working on a platform called Impact Folio, and we're going to be launching the pilot of this platform in October. NGOs they're out to solve some pretty big problems in the world, but they're also competing with each other because we've heard that there is such a limited amount of funds available for NGOs, and the funds are getting smaller. And so you've got NGOs competing with each other, and the challenge for us would be developing this platform, Impact Folio, which helps to curate high impact projects and put them in front of funders. The challenge for us is to make this platform open, because we can develop this at WWF, but there's absolutely no point in it being developed if we're the only organisation that's going to use it. So we have to make this platform open. And that's going to be a challenge for WWF. I'm saying it right here and now, but we have to do it. And we have to throw this gauntlet down to ourselves. And other NGOs will have to follow suit as well.
On that note, how do you see the role of NGOs changing as we move to the blockchain paradigm? From where it is now, yeah.
I think it's similar to what I just sort of articulated then, where we'll see NGOs articulating the problem and articulating the systems dynamics behind the problem and how you can go about solving that problem, and then verifying the impact. And it might be that NGOs create the mechanisms by which impact is verified. It might be a token mechanics, or it might be something else. It might be crowdsourced verification. So that's the role I think that NGOs are going to have to shift into if we're going to exponentially scale the amount of impact that we can have. I think there's many roles for blockchain in this space. I think there is roles for blockchain in tokenized payments based on impact. And there are already models for this now being experimented with on. Whether they can scale or not, I'm not sure. Certainly they can't at the moment. Blockchain can be used for tracking payments, of course. It can be used for tracking impact along the supply chain. We saw a lot about supply chains within the impact space earlier as well. So I think NGOs will have to be aware first about what blockchain can do, and then think about how they're going to have to restructure so that they're going to be leaders and not laggards in the space.
Anyone else want to add to that? Yeah?
I think that a lot of impact is really a people problem, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to help people on the ground. And I think there's this huge tendency for tech people, I'm very guilty of this, to get really excited about technology and go up charging into the abyss, convinced that we've created something new and exciting. I mean, so what I explained before was widely known inside the NGO space as closed loop cash programming. It's been around for a decade. And I think that NGOs have this really great ability to articulate really clearly how we actually can have this impact. And they have the social impact, so the social capital to say, yes, this organisation is doing something that is meaningful for us. And without that relationship between people who have the willingness to go out and try new exciting things, and NGOs who actually say, guys, this is actually how you're going to do positive things in the world, I think we're not really going to get very far. You're going to end up with a whole bunch of Silicon Valley types who have thought they've done something new, but are actually breaking decades of best practice that have been established by NGOs for really, really hard lessons. And if we were to lose that opportunity to mutually learn from each other, I think it would be a really big shame. So I think that's a huge part that NGOs have to play.
So I want to shift to a different topic. Lena was talking before about environmental social governance, or another version of that that's often referred to as corporate social responsibility. So how do you see blockchain being able to benefit organizations or enterprises that are interested in ESG or CSR?
I think one of the areas is the ability to the security that provides blockchain. So I think a lot of people are concerned about corruption and all of these sort of issues that are around the world. And I think if people is more, the level of security that provides the blockchain will help in that space.
I think CSR has to be demand-led, and we are seeing the trend. So I'm a numbers guy, so the Deloitte Millennial Survey stated that 87% of millennials are interested in their organization having a positive impact on the environment and outside just for-profit. So besides for-profit, there's for-purpose as well. So you're talking about 87% of millennials surveyed, and then you're also talking about the fact that there's some research which probably needs to be validated about $30 trillion of inherited wealth will come to millennials in the next couple of years. And then you're also talking about the fact that something like the majority of cryptocurrency investors are millennials as well, between the age of 20 to 35, mostly male and a good portion of female. So you've got a cocktail of all these people, specifically millennials, which are going to be the future of our generation. And if describing myself as well, and quite a number of people here in the room. And if we find out that our organizations would like to explore that for-profit and for-purpose angle, and that blockchain element, because there will probably be an element of tokenization when it comes to giving, I think that would be a great way for CSR to take that approach. And we're starting to see trends. So this Blockchain Philanthropy Foundation, it didn't exist 12 months ago. Now it's bringing people like you. And we've just heard from the CEO of Save the Children, one of the largest charities in the world as well. And Rosa as well, credits to you, has started the Blockchain for Social Impact in Melbourne, a meetup group. And that meetup group has been growing with up to 100 people attending. Every month they organize an event. So all this attracts corporates, and I hope that this will also attract the form of innovation in blockchain, not just for their business, for profit, but for purpose as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We co-launched the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition up in Sydney with ConsenSys, and it was really interesting to see the makeup of the people in the room. There was we were expecting about 150, and we had about 300. It was crammed, and I'd say about probably 30% were from NGOs, and the rest were from finance, corporate, and other areas of business. And so there was a real hunger, I've noticed in the business community, to understand how blockchain can be used to transform business models and to explore business models that put impact as well as financial return at the centre. And I think that's a really encouraging sign. And so, if we can be creating the frameworks for these groups to come together and to collaborate, then we'll see some pretty fruitful results. But I think it was something that we touched on this morning, that Annie touched on this morning actually, that collaboration is key here. That no one organisation will be able to do this on their own, because we need to be sort of blending the IP from NGOs and from corporates and from startups in order to come up with that solution which is valuable and impactful. And so if we can continue to create sort of frameworks like this, then we'll see hopefully some pretty exciting solutions coming out of it.
Thank you. So just to play devil's advocate, and not to name and shame, but just in a general sense, I was wondering if you could talk about whether you've seen instances where blockchain is being used in the impact space where it's maybe not necessary or shouldn't be being used, that kind of thing. Go ahead.
I'm willing to name and shame as well. There's something called the Rohingya Project, and it's this plan to put Rohingya's identities onto the blockchain, and they're actually doing it right now. I think this is perhaps one of the most irresponsible things I've ever seen. I don't care how much encryption you supposedly had. I mean, the history of encryption is that it's been unbreakable until the day it's been broken. And we need to remember our blockchain is designed to be immutable. So what this organisation has done is literally taken some of the most vulnerable peoples in the world, ethnicities in the world, put their names and their identities onto the blockchain. If that encryption ever gets broken in 50 years, that's a laundry list for someone who wants to commit genocide against a specific ethnicity to go ahead and do that. And I think this is a classic example of us like not thinking about what the actual implications of this technology is. And I think as a whole, sometimes we just need to slow down and think about what we're actually doing before going and doing it.
I haven't seen that. That's very interesting. And the interesting thing is that we all have that outside at the moment, so unfortunately, and they basically providing the little information that someone else don't have to be able to put the puzzle together. So apart from something like that, I don't see in the blockchain any other, because of the security side that provide, except when there is collusion, I think is at the moment the most secure path to basically organize any transaction.
So this is my final question, and then I'll hand over to the audience, who I'm sure will have many questions for you. It's been really interesting. What would you say to the skeptics in the for-purpose or impact industry with regards to blockchain?
Stay skeptical.
Yeah. What would you say regarding like the notion that it's just all hype or go away, that kind of thing?
No, like skepticism is so important at the moment. Like we absolutely need to be skeptical and to be constantly challenging ourselves to think, is it the right solution? We have, like even with the supply chain traceability transparency tool, blockchain is only a tiny, tiny bit of that. And in fact, in the first 6 to 8 months of going deep into these supply chains, to the granularity of these supply chains, blockchain it basically threw up a whole bunch of more questions that we needed to answer before it started answering questions for us, which was how do we guarantee the integrity of the data going into these supply chains, and how are we making sure that when we're working with smallholder farmers that we are not compromising their sovereign identity, and so many questions that blockchain is really part of that, the data is part of that, and the way we treat people on the ground is part of that. So I'd say that rushing in to build a shiny new blockchain solution is not necessarily such a good idea, and there's a lot of risk with organisations that are looking to do that for the wrong reasons. So skepticism is very healthy.
Yeah. And I'll say, leave it to the crazy people, because it's the crazy people who ultimately change the world one day, right? Or the opposite effect, right? But I'll draw a comparison with the internet days again, like a lot of blockchain comparisons, like 996, right? And I've been reading the life and story of Jack Ma, and Jack Ma, started Alibaba, but before that, not many knew that he actually started China Yellow Pages. He was the very first to upload information on the internet, and he would go around to different retailers and professional services and hotels to ask them to upload information on the internet when the internet just started. And everyone was so skeptical of whether it even worked. And everyone said that he was actually a swindler because he was trying to upload something to the cloud, which took like an hour to load. And he struck lucky because there was a hotel that said, okay, I'll try you, and they uploaded it on the internet. And there was a conference by the United Nations in Shanghai back in those days, and the Americans started to try looking on the internet, and they found that hotel and vacation there. And that was one of the pivotal points in how Jack Ma went on to get into the internet business and then into e-commerce and now Alibaba. But in that story was that magic of doing something that very few people did. But that story also is juxtaposed with the fact that Pets.com raised 356 million and lost it all during the dot-com bust. So I like you, healthy amount of skepticism, but also then taking the puns on the crazy people. Yeah.
Anything to add to that? All right. Good? Okay. Open to the floor. Go ahead.
Is there a mic coming down?
Thank you.
So, just on the topic of deposits, so I've always struggled to understand how blockchain guarantees deposits. So, if there's a deceptive supplier, say, here's some certified organic almonds grown in Victoria, loaded onto the blockchain, but instead that deceptive supplier grows them with herbicides and insecticides. That information then your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's why blockchain isn't the only solution. Like, I'll give you an example. There are lots of environmental standards and certifications at the moment, and blockchain isn't going to replace them. Some people think it is the great panacea, but it's just not. We still need to be having these standards that are robust and that have integrity, and they will involve humans getting involved as well. However, there are some commodities that lend themselves to blockchain-based provenance solutions better than others. Tuna is pretty easy because when it comes onto the boat, or out of the water and onto the boat, you slap an RFID tag on it. That tag follows it the length of its journey, or if it gets packed into a box, it'll have a QR code. So it's easy to track it from ocean to boat to processing plant to freight to restaurant. In the case of the trawlers that we were working with, the trawlers were they were tracked using satellite data, so you can see if they were fishing in illegal waters or not, or if the fishers were caught in legal waters. So for us, when we're working on overfishing, which is a big problem, you can start to see how that can become a solution. That said, there are still lots of part of the even with the tuna supply chain that you can't guarantee. So the conditions of the workers on the boat, for example. So there are still lots of data that you just can't guarantee with a blockchain solution on its own. You still need to have humans involved. And then when you start to think about commodities like palm oil, it gets even more complicated. I think the answer to your question is there isn't a magic bullet solution. It's still complicated, but what blockchain can help you with is to say, okay, along this supply chain, one of the problems with supply chains is it's called one up, one down, right? The chain of custody, any actor in the supply chain will say, well, I'm only responsible for where I got it from and who I'm selling it to, but I don't really care about anything before that with any subcontractors. And what blockchain can actually say is, okay, we can guarantee the integrity of the data along the supply chain because we can say that the way it was collected was robust and trustworthy, except that bit. So we can say, okay, red flag, that part along the supply chain is the only bit where we can't really guarantee the integrity of the data going in, so that's where we should put our observers, or that's where we should put our humans on the ground and do some more work in that space. So that's basically how it can help at the moment. But you can see a situation in 3 or 4 years' time when sensors get a lot more sophisticated, when you start having DNA, able to track commodities by DNA, there are situations in the future where it can get a lot better, but we're certainly not there yet.
Just on the point around the supply chain, if there's a failing of one certain area where you could potentially enhance it, where you could potentially enhance it further, I think, is with smart contracts and release of funds. So if someone, because a lot of the time in supply chain is subjective whether you honour the contracts, next time maybe we'll sort it out, we'll sort it out, and people keep failing, businesses keep getting annoyed with their suppliers and that accountability. So what if the financial transactions were built into the smart contract, built into, when you identify, maybe it's 5 minutes late. Maybe you can just say, look, for every minute you're late, you deduct $1 from the contract. That's where I think you can become a hell of a lot more accountable when it comes to you say you're going to do what you're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of blockchain. That's the beauty of smart contracts. I mean, it could be any kind of agreement between two parties. It could be sustainability criteria, it could be health criteria, it could be the temperature that is transported, the time it arrives. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different variables. Yeah, for sure.
That just automates the process. It's more efficient.
Yep.
Comment. Do you want to get the mic?
Just a quick comment on that point and a point before about the labour rights. So Oxfam is exploring exactly that, so smart contracting, automated payments of organic rice from Cambodia to Europe to exactly automate the payments when they get from the association to the distributor, etc., all the way through. And then building out so that you can scan your QR code and know that it's from Jimmy in Phnom Penh. The other thing that we're doing, back to the labour rights question, is I think everything in the supply chain, to your point, relies on humans at some point to enter the data or to do something to get the data, whether it's to put the RFID tag on the tuna or whatever. So we're doing something in Morocco with strawberry producers to get strawberries from Morocco to Sweden, and it's not so much the supply chain we're interested in, it's the branding that those producers can legitimately say we treat our workers well. And if the workers would put the data on the blockchain that says we are treated well, and so you can guarantee that all the way through.
Yeah, and they can also access finance as well. They may be one of the billion or so people in the world who were previously unbanked, and they can access finance and all the other benefits that come with that. Yeah, that's great.
Excellent panel session, by the way, and just it's an inspiration to each of the presenters. It's done a fantastic job. My question is, we've heard a lot about larger organisations testing through the blockchain, but obviously smaller not-for-profits don't have the infrastructure or the finances as such to do the testing. I don't know whether this is something that Jason can answer, but is there a generic kind of solution that smaller organisations can collaborate on, that their voice can be heard, so that we can develop a open access? And I'm not a techie, I'm a lawyer, don't shoot me. But is there anything around that can be open access? I think the tech word is API or something.
Yes.
That's the one. That can be accessed by the smaller organisations to go through this testing phase so that they do have a voice.
Yeah, it used to be a lawyer, so don't shoot me too. Now, we are looking for entrepreneurs. These smaller, like the 52,000 charities, 80% are small ones. Like, it's just too much effort to bring them all together, form a consortium and develop something there. They need to focus on doing what they do best. We need to find the entrepreneurs that can create the next zero of the future, where it's accounting for small businesses. We need to find entrepreneurs that can find a solution where many small, the up-and-comings can all use as well. And that's what we need to find.
We're being able to test most of our infrastructure for free. And we use a platform called Infura, which is an API gateway onto the Ethereum network. And I found out month after month of using it that it was built by ConsenSys. And then you use something else, and so much of the stuff in the Ethereum network, at least, has been taken by this organisation that decided that they wanted to make blockchain really ubiquitous, and then just roll with it. One of the things I think that becomes really interesting from a finance point of view is once you move onto the main net, we still have issues with transaction costs that it's very hard for us to read. So there was this big debacle about a month or so ago where some organisation tried to do some publicity stunt to get things listed on the exchange, and the number of transactions that just had very little incremental value just went through the roof. And blockchain effectively being the market mechanism when you pay for transactions, the price of doing transactions also went up, and that made it really hard for us. And so I think the role, like one of the roles of some of the bigger organisations like ConsenSys can be to like educate, and just like you can't force big organisations to stop doing what's effectively bullshit on blockchain, but you can name and shame and say, guys, come on. If you really buy into this being a reasonable thing, then what are you doing using this to basically market something and then shut the rest of the chain down? But there's definitely APIs out there, and I'm sure you guys have bought in just as much as ConsenSys has.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of getting out there, doing the research and finding them, I think.
In terms of a pathway for a smaller NGO who wanted to actually start to have a play and to build some stuff, I think that while NGOs don't have a lot of money, they do have other very valuable assets. So they have their brand, they have their IP, they have their people, they have lots of very good networks. Often they have great people on their boards. And so these are assets that they can use to partner up with entrepreneurs or blockchain developers. And there are lots of developers out there who are wanting to do really interesting stuff with blockchain in the social impact space. And so I think, and it goes back to a point that Annie made this morning, that whilst NGOs don't necessarily need to have tech people, too many tech people, NGOs aren't tech companies are tech companies. They need to be able to ask the right questions when they're approached by entrepreneurs or by developers who might want to help, but they might want to validate their new idea or their concept. And so I think if we can sort of upskill NGOs, the smaller NGOs, to at least be able to ask the right kind of questions, they might be able to partner with developers or entrepreneurs who are keen to try out something new for a very, very low cost. And they should absolutely do that.
I think other thing that is important is education. I think a lot of these organizations, the small ones that you mentioned, they don't really are aware of how the benefit that they can get if they get into the blockchain technology, and how they can actually use it, and how they can maybe be able to reach more people to help them in whatever cause they're helping. So, and I think part of this conference and what other people is doing here is trying to get to that educational piece.
Sorry, to add on to that, yeah. So actually, I'll just make a shout out since we're talking about this, right? NEM Foundation actually has the money. So we're looking for, Andy Warhol once said, you've got a party when you've got money and talent in the room. So NEM actually as a foundation has the money. We're looking for talented entrepreneurs or non-profits to come and partner with us to do this. A bit of the history of NEM. NEM started in 2015. We minted 9 billion tokens, pre-mine. And we give out 6 billion. 3 billion is kept at the foundation to protect, promote, and develop the NEM blockchain protocol. And part of that money actually is to fund projects like this. So we're looking to fund projects that are looking to developing their blockchain. So we've supported the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub with a few things, and the Blockchain RMIT Student Club as well. So we're looking to help, and there are organizations like NEM as well, and many choices to work with. But I guess one point to note is there's a TED Talk about someone who studied something like 1,000 startups and found out what makes a successful organization. Is it a team? Is it the idea? Is it execution? Is it the timing? And what that person found out was it was actually the timing. So you want to come in at the right time as well. So I'm still not sure whether it's the right time where smaller charities come in, or the right time for bigger charities to invest resources into this. But what I know is that the trends are being watched and it's happening.
Thank you.
I'm curious about the comment made by Nick.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you can hear me, but the Rohingya refugees in this blockchain that you believe should not be doing what it's doing.
Yes.
Right. So, as an auditor, my question is, so who's auditing these people, or at least keeping a track on this is wrong, you know it's wrong, how do you stop it? But where's the governance around this?
I wish I had a good answer. I mean, this is the double-edged blade of blockchain, right? I mean, half the point is that there is no top governing body that really can decide what goes on a blockchain or not. If you don't like one blockchain, you can move to another one that is equally immutable. The thing about the Rohingya project is their intentions are absolutely in the right place. The guy who actually founded it is Rohingya himself. Everyone here is trying to do the best. So this one comes down to an education, I think. People need to understand why the blockchain is necessary for what they want to do. I think that's the most important thing is whenever you start to think about whether blockchain is relevant or not, you need to be very clear that the blockchain at the end of the day, someone explained to me it's like a computer in the corner that anyone can use, except it's a Commodore 64 from 40 years ago that can process transactions at 1/1000th of the speed as what my iPhone can do right now. And so you give up all the niceties of a lot of modern technology just for the sake of immutability and trustlessness. And so before you even start to commit your first line of code or try and hire your first smart contract developer to do something on the blockchain, you need to have an absolutely bulletproof reason as to why blockchain is 100% the best solution for this and why you're willing to go and give up a Postgres database which can be launched on Amazon Web Services for about $1 a week sort of thing. And I think that's while you can't audit this and while there is no governance, I think if we educate more people around that why, I think you get far better outcomes and far better outcomes for people.
Just one question.
I just wanted to ask around from an NGO, price volatility using the blockchain. Obviously, some chains have different capabilities than others. How important is it that there is no price volatility? Whether it can be achieved now is, it's dependent on the chain's capabilities. But will that be an important factor for future?
It's extremely important. I found a project called Taxi Cash. So you buy the token and then you can pay for taxi minus the transaction fees. But can you imagine if the price goes up and down? Like your taxi cost is just going to be different every time, right? And that's the same way for charities and for any other places where volatility is so important. Managing volatility.
Well, what about free transactions?
Sorry, free transactions. Yeah, that's something to address as well. So for example, the NAM public blockchain, you still need to pay for a public transaction. That's 0.05 ZAM to charge. And the Ethereum blockchain has transaction costs, the Bitcoin blockchain has transaction costs. So like I said, maybe it's the timing. It's about finding the right timing when the technology suits. Currently, you can build your own private blockchain with your own nodes, and the transaction cost is free. You just need to maintain the service, but then there's a cost to develop your private blockchain as well. So that's why only the larger organizations with a bit more firepower are working with it.
Well, just on that, EOS has free transactions, which wasn't mentioned, and that's one which is what you're talking around speed of transactions, the ability to get it cross-border immediately without transaction fees. And that sounds like one of the key requirements for NGOs is low costs and accessibility, kind of borderless accessibility, but with elements of blockchains.
Yep.
What I was going to say is, so we decided very early on that having donations coming in Ethereum, and an NGO putting in like $1 million, and then next thing you know, that's actually $6 million, and then 2 hours later, that's 30 cents. It's kind of untenable when you're trying to do a cash program. And we actually use a stable coin called DAI as our main form of transaction these days. And so that's pegged 1 to 1 to the US dollar, and everyone was pretty skeptical about it until the price, we had that big drop in price over the summer, and the value changed like 99 cents per dollar and then went back up. So the technology is pretty solid there. The reality is that blockchains, there is no one-size-fits-all blockchain, right? You can't decide that blockchains all need to be stable and all need to have, fast transaction speeds and all need to have this. Classic example is the Sovereign Network, which is a Hyperledger project, as they've decided that all they care about is building self-sovereign ID. And so they've built that from the ground up. At the end of the day, you don't put things on the blockchain. Blockchain is a basic maps technology like internet or HTTP protocols or even just cryptography. And so how you use that and when you decide that's suitable for what you build that's just the starting point, and everything else comes after that.
Yep. And just a bit of education.
And then we have to wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah. So there are actually 130 different blockchains around. So EOS is a blockchain, Ethereum is a blockchain, NAM is a blockchain. So if you're a charity and organization, it's wise to actually look into different blockchain technologies. It's a bit like the dating game, right? Before you actually get serious with someone, you got to find out what the market is like first, and there are benefits to certain blockchains. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, wrap up.
So that's all we have time for. Thank you all so much. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Can I?